When the Normans began numbering kings, they left out King Edward the Confessor, even though he was the last Anglo-Saxon king, in an apparent attempt to ignore Anglo-Saxon influences before the Norman Conquest. Most people have heard of the Norman Conquest and the Battle of Hastings. The invasion was remarkably short, and the battle only lasted one day. But both events forever altered the trajectory of British history. The year 1066 remains one of the significant turning points in British history. Britain is still recovering from the Norman Conquest, and many conflicts today concerning Scottish and Welsh independence are linked to William the Conqueror. Although Britain had had conflict in conquering kings before, it had never been like this. In 1 year, the Anglo-Saxons lost the English throne and suddenly found themselves under the rule of a foreign power. With their new ruler, England was tied to continental Europe, drawing the developing nation into wars and other political events they had not dreamed of, and sending Britain on a course to become the world leaders they are today. What was England like before the Norman Conquest? Before the Norman Conquest, the Anglo-Saxons ruled what is today England. The Romans left Britain around 409 CE, and the Anglo-Saxons took over during the 5th century. The Anglo-Saxons did not conquer Britain as one group. Instead, they were made up of 3 separate Germanic tribes called the Angles, the Saxons, and the Jutes. They settled themselves into different kingdoms around Britain, although they mainly settled in what we would call England today. The Anglo-Saxons did not call it England at this early stage, but we will refer to the modern-day country for ease of learning. Some of their old boundaries are still used today. There were 7 major kingdoms, and their power and influence over each other shifted during Anglo-Saxon history. The Anglo-Saxons were famous for ruling when Christianity was introduced in Britain. Technically, the first Christians had arrived during Roman rule, but once the Romans left, the people quickly returned to their own religions. The Anglo-Saxons were pagan and brought their pantheon with them to Britain. When St. Augustine of Canterbury arrived in Kent in 597 CE, he started a religious conversion that spread throughout the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms, and Christianity soon became an essential part of Anglo-Saxon culture. They built monasteries as places of learning and commerce. But because the monasteries tended to collect treasures and wealth without much protection, they also served as a lure for the Vikings. The Vikings did not single out Britain for their raids. Instead, the Vikings raided across the European coast as far south as the Mediterranean Sea. They did begin invading and conquering parts of Britain, though, which caused the remaining Anglo-Saxon kingdoms to unite against them. King Alfred the Great of Wessex was a powerful Anglo-Saxon leader. Despite being the 5th of 5 brothers, Alfred became the King of Wessex in 871 CE. By then, Wessex was the last Anglo-Saxon kingdom resisting the Vikings, and despite all odds, King Alfred was able to stop the Viking invasion. Alfred agreed to split England with the Vikings. Now that peace was mainly settled, Alfred set about building his people back up from the war. He wrote new laws, had books made, and encouraged people to learn how to read. His devotion to bettering his kingdom has made King Alfred the Great one of the most beloved kings in English history. Although King Alfred did not unite all of England during his rule, he set the stage for his heirs to do so, leading to a very different England in 1066 that had been possible before the Viking invasions. By 1066, England had one king and was developing its national government. England seemed to be on its way to creating a unified Anglo-Saxon-based society. But that all changed with the Normans' arrival. Why did the Normans invade? The Normans invaded England because William, Duke of Normandy, believed he was the rightful heir to the throne, and he claimed that Edward the Confessor had named him as his successor. Edward the Confessor was the second-to-last Anglo-Saxon king, and he was more interested in religion and learning than he was in running a kingdom. His reign was stable, but this can be attributed to the people behind the throne, such as Harold Godwinson. Edward did have a wife, but he never produced any heirs, which led to a question of succession. Edward had the habit of using this uncertainty to get what he wanted from the people close to him. However, as he neared his death, Edward the Confessor never clearly named his heir. Harold Godwinson seemed the obvious choice. He had essentially been the king for years and had already proven himself to be a strong and popular leader. According to the people, with Edward on his deathbed, the king had named Harold Godwinson as his successor. He was crowned Harold II the very next day, but his coronation did not resolve the question of succession. It was unusual for the next king to be crowned so rapidly. It almost appeared that Harold was trying to cut off any rival claimants and establish his right to the throne before anyone could oppose him. Unfortunately, his rushed coronation did not silence any opposition. Harold may have been named the successor, but he did not have any blood relation to the royal family. William of Normandy had the most substantial claim to the throne by blood. William was the Duke of Normandy, although he had started life being called William the Bastard. He was an illegitimate son of Duke Robert I of Normandy, and he soon proved himself to be tough and eager for power. William was a distant relation to King Edward and claimed that Edward promised him the throne in 1051, but historians still disagree about whether this is true. Either way, William convinced several other kings of his claim to the throne. He even convinced the Pope and received his backing. Harold II refused to cede the throne to William, so William invaded England and led the Norman Conquest. How did the Battle of Hastings change British history? The Battle of Hastings was not the only battle in 1066. Harold II also had to defend his country from King Harald Hardrada, the Norwegian king who also wanted the English throne. King Harold II of England successfully stopped that invasion, but immediately had to march south to meet William's forces. The Battle of Hastings would determine who held the English throne, changing British history forever. William landed in England on September 28, 1066, in Pevensey Bay on the southern English coast. They raided several towns and villages along the way, finally settling at Hastings as their primary center for the invasion. Because of the fighting in the north, King Harold's English army was weaker than it should have been. As he marched south, he attempted to rally additional troops, for Harold was anxious to stop William's raids. That is possibly why King Harold II began the battle almost as soon as he arrived, even though he did not have all the needed troops. The Battle of Hastings took place about 7 miles away from the town. The site is marked by a small town called Battle today. Although we don't know exactly how big the two armies were, we know that William had more archers than Harold II, which was a significant advantage, and Harold's archers were tired after the grueling march south. Although we might consider the Battle of Hastings short today, at the time this battle was abnormally long. Medieval battles were usually only a couple of hours because the soldiers needed to rest from carrying heavy armor and weapons. But the Battle of Hastings lasted almost an entire day. In the morning of October 14th, the battle began, and William quickly discovered that the Anglo-Saxon shield wall was harder to break than initially thought. The Anglo-Saxons held their shield wall for most of the day. However, William was an excellent general, and he decided to use an old war trick to encourage the Anglo-Saxons to break their shield wall voluntarily. He had his army charge the wall, pretend to fail, and then begin to retreat. It was a false retreat, but the Anglo-Saxons were excited. They broke their shield wall to chase the retreating invaders. Once they broke the wall, the Normans turned back and resumed the battle, leaving the Anglo-Saxons in a much weaker defensive position that eventually led to their surrender. Historians are not sure when Harold II died that day, but most agree that an arrow probably killed him. Usually, once the leader died, the medieval army fled from the battlefield. Still, Harold's army continued to fight William after their king's death, probably because they refused to accept William as the legitimate king. The Anglo-Saxons could not hold off the Normans forever without their king, so they fled into the woods at the end of the day. William the Conqueror had won the battle. The fate of Britain was forever changed as William marched to London and was coronated on Christmas Day, 1066. Of course, the Anglo-Saxons did not immediately accept their new conquering king. Not all of the Anglo-Saxon forces were at the Battle of Hastings, so William the Conqueror spent about 5 years putting down rebellions and defending his claim to the throne. These events included conquests into Scotland, with most of Wales coming under English subjugation after the Norman Conquest. The impacts of those conquests are still part of Britain's political landscape today. King William I changed many parts of Anglo-Saxon life, mainly because he expanded feudalism in England. He needed to ensure the people in power were loyal to him, so the political changes extended even to the county's leaders. Giving land for loyalty became much more common under William's rule. Noble families could now acquire as much land as they wanted instead of being restricted to prevent imbalances in power. The nobility now fought amongst themselves to gain more power, land, and influence instead of fighting against the king. Giving royal lands also helped start feudalism in Britain, as the lords of the land became responsible for the local courts, and more Anglo-Saxons found themselves working under the lordship of the Normans. As more land fell under royal control, King William I established separate land for monasteries and royal forests. Only nobility was allowed to hunt in the royal forests, but many of us are familiar with royal forests today because of the tales of Robin Hood. The royal forests were another way to separate those in power from those who were not, and in the beginning, they divided the conquering Normans from the Anglo-Saxons. William's governmental policies extended further than just replacing the people in power. Britain had not long been strongly connected to continental Europe during Anglo-Saxon times. They had actually been closer to the Viking Scandinavian countries than to the rest of Europe. When William took the throne, he established a much stronger connection between Britain and France. This new relationship would shape Britain in unexpected ways throughout its history, including leading directly to the 100 Years' War. Closer to home, King William I also changed how his government kept records, making them much more meticulous than they had been under the Anglo-Saxons. He raised taxes, which was not popular, and even influenced the development of the English language. The Anglo-Saxons spoke a Germanic language before the Normans arrived, but when William became king, he made French the language of the court. Over time, the two languages mixed and set the people on the track to create the English language. Although the version spoken today is nothing like the version spoken during the 11th and 12th centuries, the English language started with the Norman invasion and would eventually evolve into the language it is today. Overall, the Battle of Hastings proved instrumental to British history because its outcome determined how Britain would develop over the next millennia. William gave England a mostly stable line of kings and moved the country closer to continental Europe. He changed the social structures and political leaders, setting England on a course that would lead it to become one of the modern world leaders. Thanks to the Battle of Hastings, it took only one day to change British history forever. How would you like to get a deeper understanding of history, impress your friends, and predict the future more accurately based on past events? If this sounds like something you might be into, then check out the brand new Captivating History Book Club by clicking the first link in the description. To learn more about the Norman Conquest, check out our book, The Norman Conquest, a captivating guide to the Normans and the invasion of England by William the Conqueror, including events such as the Battle of Stamford Bridge and the Battle of Hastings. It's available as an ebook, paperback, and audiobook. If you enjoyed the video, please hit the like button and subscribe for more videos like this.